It was the summer after school had finished, when I finally found myself a decent paying job. It wasn't the finest place to work, but I needed cash, having spent most of it on road trips, where I did nothing but party for days. The shop was small, and it turned out that I was the only staff available for the night shift. I settled down well enough, thanks to my manager Mark. He was a nice guy, always smiling, helpful, and never once had I seen him angry. I remember a week back when a customer started getting heated, some steroid-jacked asshole whose card declined at the till. I tried telling him that I couldn't just let him off this one time, but then he grabbed my collar and started cursing at me. Hearing the commotion, Mark came up to the customer and politely asked him to release me. Naturally, the juicehead didn't, so Mark put a hand on his shoulder, which earned him a punch to the face. A punch like that should have knocked out a scrawny guy like Mark, but instead, blood gushing from his nose, he straightened up and asked the guy to leave, showing no pain or emotion. At that, the customer left quietly, all the while being dumbfounded. Mark nodded at me and went back to his back room, as if nothing had happened. So yeah, aside from the extreme work hours and the occasional asshole, the job wasn't too bad. It was the second week of working there, that Sunday, a slower day than usual. Normally on Sunday nights, there'd be a decent amount of people lining up to buy drinks, except today. The first customer didn't arrive until 2 a.m., just under halfway through my shift. He was strange, to say the least. He wore nothing but an oversized hoodie, which thankfully covered the top half of his legs. He seemed alert. His eyes darted around like a pinball machine. I thought he was high or something, although it wasn't uncommon to see in my shifts. He disappeared somewhere over in the third aisle, before the doors were abruptly barged open again. A second guy came in, wearing a business suit, hair slicked back, and stinking of cologne. A late-night worker like me, but working a job that quadrupled my salary. He ignored me. Clearly I wasn't worth paying attention to, and instead he headed over to the alcohol section. I didn't see the hooded person for a while, so I watched YouTube. Suddenly, there was a crash from outside, like metal slamming against metal. The backroom door opened, and Mark came out. "You should check that out," he said. "I'll work the till for a minute." I went out to investigate, trudging along the parking lot. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I noticed the overturned bins where a family of foxes were having a feast. I went back to the store. I wasn't paid enough to do anything about it. Taking over from Mark, who went back, I attended to the businessman, who didn't let me scan the products. Instead, he threw a wad of cash, deftly leaving with a bottle of Jameson's. There was another crashing sound, but I ignored it, thinking it was the foxes again. That's when the guy with the hoodie came into sight again, this time with a grin and a large jug of bleach in his hand. Before he could even make it to the counter, he spewed up a tide of vomit, splashing around his bare feet and all over the aisle. He fell unconscious, spilling the bleach. Groaning, I took up a mop and went over to clean up. Pulling the man over to another aisle, I got to work against the stain, grimacing as I recognized the smell of piss. After about 10 minutes, I'd finished up most of the floor. Then I went over to check the bumper clot. Except he wasn't there. I looked around the store for a while, but no, nothing. I went back to my station, where sure enough Mark sat. "Did somebody leave?" I asked. He didn't look too good. "No, nobody's come in or left yet," Mark replied, looking a little puzzled. "You cleaned up the floor?" "Yes." With that, Mark left, and I finished off the next 3 hours of my shift. Occasionally, I'd hear the thumping again, but thought nothing of it. Finally, I was home and went straight to sleep. I awoke to furious knocking on the door. I scrambled to my feet and doubled back when I saw 2 police officers. They introduced themselves and asked if they could interview me. There had been disappearances around the area, and investigations hadn't uncovered anything. They wanted to know if I knew anything about them, and sure enough, things became familiar to me. Missing people like the steroid head a week ago, or the businessman, and the hooded guy. There were other missing customers as well, and eventually, I asked them if they were questioning Mark too. They stopped. "Who's Mark?" they asked. The manager. He works the same shifts as I do. "We've checked the company records. There ain't no Mark on there. Only you." After a while of exchanging words, they put me into a police cruiser and drove to the store. They told me to show them where Mark was. A vague request, and I prayed that he was in today. So far, I knew that I looked like the prime suspect, and only Mark could confirm that I was not involved. I led them to the backroom door and knocked. No response. I knocked a little harder. Still nothing. The police took over, kicking the door down and switching on the light. The horror before us would be something that would never leave my mind. I retched uncontrollably as the stench overpowered me. Stacked up against the far wall were piles of bodies mixed in with each other. Some of them were headless, others missing limbs. The buzz of flies was deafening. The officers cuffed me, quickly whisking me away to the police station. My trial's set to be soon, and as it stands, I'm going to jail. They filed through records, pictures, footage. I was the only one ever seen. But I swear to God, Mark was there. He always was, and I don't care if they call me crazy, because even in the dead of night, in my cell, I can see him in the corner of the room.